Hello there, and welcome back to another painting session. And in this session we're going to be painting Rick Grimes from The Walking Dead All Out War. And here is Rick primed and ready. So as always I'm going to start with the skin. For this miniature I'm painting a slightly different colour skin tone to my normal Citadel. I'm going to try out a different skin colour and see how this goes, and we'll give this a go. So we're going to start with a Vallejo medium flesh tone, and this has almost a little bit of a kind of a yellowy skin tone. I would have thought, or at least more of a yellow skin tone than what I'm used to with Citadel. The Citadel ones tend to be a little bit more pink, so as I say, we'll see how this goes. So we're just going to layer across the face and the hands with a nice thin layer of medium flesh tone. And there we go, and once that's dry, just going to cover that in an Army Painter flesh wash, and you can use a Reichland flesh shade or something along those lines. Just try to be careful not to let it pool down too much. Try to manipulate and move this around. The good thing with the Army Painter flesh tone is that if it pools in one stage, it won't detract from too much of your details or anything like that. It is quite forgiving, it dries quite nicely, so it does have quite a nice little drying effect to it. I'll show you in a moment once it's done. Don't forget to go across the hands. It's really good for getting into the ridges of the hands and the fingers. And there you go. Once that's dried down, it gives you this really nice sort of sort of shaded area just under the eyes and around the mouth and things like that, which is kind of all we need. And from there we're just going to build the colours back up, so using a very fine, very thin brush, just going to build that medium flesh tone back up, but just trying to avoid where the flesh tone has sat just in between the eyes, the cheekbones, things like that. With this, again, this is a nice thin layer, so this is going to be something that we can build up on 2 or 3 layers should we need to. I'm just going to try to follow around some of the character around the face. So as you see, just underneath the eyes there, the cheekbones, where the light would kind of hit onto this miniature. I'm just trying to avoid going anywhere around sort of the lips and the mouth area. The forehead as well, and kind of create our own little version of creases by just putting a few lines across the forehead. Where the eyebrows meet and the head is, we're going to put a little bit of colour there, but you kind of want to leave a line between the eyebrows and the head itself, so that creates a little bit of depth, creates a little bit of a layer of almost like a crease in the face as well. And from there, what we're going to do, we're just going to highlight that back up just slightly. So I'm mixing the medium flesh tone that we've used, so the base colour, then the shade, then back up to the base. And we're just going to use that mixed in with a little bit of bone white as well from Vallejo. And now for this I'm just hitting and just catching the very highlighted areas, so just the nose, across the cheekbones, across the forehead, just parts that I think the light would really sort of stand out from and stand out on, so that this creates another layer of depth. So we haven't just got a mid-tone, we've actually got sort of a highlight tone as well. It's just going to catch the brush just across the chin here as well. I mean, you can do this a few different layers and a few different times if you want. You can mix a little bit more of the bone white in and put another layer and put just a really extreme highlight to the face and bits like that. I suppose it all just depends on how far you want to push your contrast and things on the miniature itself as well. So now that I've done the skin, I'm going to move on and do the hair. And for the hair I'm using a Vallejo khaki, which you could use as Zandri dust if you're using Citadel as well. You're just going to put a nice even layer across the hair in this way. Now looking at different pictures of Rick Grimes online and all different things like that, there's a couple of different variations to him. So some he's got very dark brown, some he's got light sort of blonde tipped blonde highlights and things. So by using a khaki, which is quite of a nice sort of neutral sort of like a neutral sort of blonde colour, what we're going to do is when we tone that down with a shade later, the shade will catch into the recesses and will help to darken that hair down so that it doesn't stay as bright. Now for the shirt, because with a lot of the paintings that I do, if you've seen any of my other videos, you'll notice that I don't tend to enjoy painting too much in direct white. So what I'm going to do with this is I'm going to use a Vallejo Ghost Grey. Now the Ghost Grey is a very, very, very light grey. This is almost white, but it's not quite white. It does have sort of a very, very subtle sort of bluish tone to it as well. And this is great because by not being directly white, if I need to push the highlight or if I need to gain more contrast by pushing the edges or the extreme highlights, I can. Whereas if I painted this shirt just white, and then when we bring the colour back up, you've kind of run out of sort of highlights you can go, because if you start at the highest, you can't go any further. So if you start really, really light, you can't push that. So by keeping something that's light, but is also muted enough that white will stand out from, we can highlight in white should we want or should we need to. Now for this guy, what I'm doing is, for both the trousers and the jacket, we're going to use a Vallejo Earth, and this is just a nice flat sort of brown colour. This is a really sort of nice middle of the road sort of brown. It's not too orange, it's not too dark, it's not too light, it's just a little bit of a middle of the road. This is a really good tone. I'm just going to speed this up a little bit and show you me painting the earth tone across the miniature. You can see that I've thinned this down quite a bit as well, because it's nice to have multiple layers. I probably put a little bit too much around the trousers, but that's fine. I'll manipulate and move that a little bit later. So yeah, because Rick is in his sort of sheriff's gear, so his jacket and his trousers are quite similar because it's all part of the same uniform. I'm going to paint both of those the same colour at the moment, so we're just going to tie that in together. Just being careful when we get close to the skin and close to the details there. There you go, just like so. So from there, just going to put a little bit more of the detailing in. It's just going to cover the handle of the axe, his boots as well, and we're going to do the belt as well in this colour. And this is Vallejo Dark Rust. Again, if you're a Citadel user, you could use something like a Dryad Bark. It's just a nice dark brown. It's a very good sort of base colour to put other colours on top, and you gain some nice highlights then when you go a little bit higher on top. You'll have to excuse my shaky hand. It can be a little bit difficult trying to paint on camera, so I tend to do a little bit on camera and then tidy them up off camera. But this is just to give you an idea as to how I paint and what's going on, and if you want to follow sort of the same routine, then you can. So there we go. Once we've got the belt in, just going to put the lighter bits just around the coat. So we've got the sort of fluffy inside of the coat here, and we're using a bone white for this. This is more of a cream colour, so again, not going directly white, not going too light, giving ourselves something that we can tone down and highlight should we need to as well. And for this, we're using this just around the coat and around the neck, and just across these little beaded edges across the bottom here as well. We're going to put that bone white across there, so that again it ties that miniature in, and it gives you sort of a little bit of a breakup between that brown. Because we're using the trousers and the jacket of the same brown, we don't want to keep that the same brown. We want to give it a little bit of a break, so we're going to put a little bit of a lighter colour in between, just to separate those two colours there. The good thing with doing the base colours like this is you don't have to be too neat, because when you go back and you start to tidy things up a little bit later, that's when you can be really like pay more attention to the detail and be a little bit neater with things. For the gun, nice and simple, just using a German grey from Vallejo again, but if you wanted, you could use just a straight black. That's absolutely fine. But the German greys are very dark grey, so it does pretty much the same sort of job as a black would. So if you wanted to paint the weapon black, that's great. And the same with the axe. Just going to put a little bit of silver across the axe. So for me, I'm using a gunmetal. And again, if you're a Citadel user, you can use something like a lead belcher. Would be probably about the equal to this. So a little bit of a darker silver, a little bit of a darker colour silver to use. You don't want to go too light straight away. You want to give yourself a little bit of a option to do highlighting. Be very careful of the belt buckle. That is quite a complicated, a little bit of a difficult one to get to. I'm going to paint the badge in a gold. So for that, I'm going to use a Citadel Retributor armor. Retributor armor is Probably my favourite gold. I've used a few different golds throughout the last couple of years with painting, and I think Retributor Armor is probably my favourite gold because you could tone it down and it still looks good. It still holds a lot of brightness and a lot of shine to it, and it also goes onto the miniatures quite thick. It's quite easy. You don't need multiple layers or anything like that. So for that, now I'm going to cover the whole miniature except for the skin because we've worked so hard on getting the skin to look so good. So I'm going to cover the whole miniature in dark tone. Now dark tone is Army Painter's version of Nuln Oil, I guess. So this is like a black wash. And again, I'm going to speed that up just so you can watch me cover the whole model. The only thing to avoid and be careful of is putting this onto any of the skin. But like I say, this is pretty much just Nuln Oil. So if you're a Citadel guy, or if you're a if you like sort of the Citadel washes, then you could use a Nuln Oil and you'll get the same sort of effect out of your miniature as you will with this. As I say, when I paint my miniatures, I tend to use a lot of Army Painter washes and shades because they tend not to be too wet, so they kind of stay in place quite a lot. They don't drip too much and they don't create too much pooling on the miniature, so they could be quite forgiving. So, but personal choice, is up to you which ones you prefer to use. As you see, as I was saying about the hair earlier, we're just going to cover that over so that it darkens that khaki down and giving you sort of like a halfway kind of mid-tone hair colour. So that's the stage that we've got to. If you just wanted something that is good enough for the tabletop and good enough to play the game, then you could stop at this point. But we want to push it. We want to try and get more contrast. We want to try and get more highlight in and more character and more depth out of the model and out of the miniature. So we're just going to go back to the earth colour that we started with the clothing, with the trousers and things like that. I was just testing that on my thumb just to see how thin the paint was, because we're going to want to layer this back up now a few different layers, and this will create a real nice level of depth and a level of character. So I'm using quite a thin down version of the base colour, and I'm trying to miss out on points here with the shaders hit those recess points and hit those creases on the trousers. And the reason is we're building up with colour and we're building a highlight up, but without touching that shaded area. And what we're going to do is we're going to paint this one, you know, you could put this in like 1 or 2 layers, and the more layers you put on with this, the brighter and the more the more this colour will stand out. But we're also going to mix in some other colours and get it to brighten up a little bit as well. And we're going to do the same sort of thing. So bit by bit, you're going to stage by stage build this highlight up. So we're going to build that contrast and create a little bit more depth, a little bit more character, and get more of that colour to pop. Apologies about me focusing the camera. As I say, it can be quite difficult trying to paint and then look at the camera and back and forth. So bear with me. So as I say, we're just going to gently put a little light layer of this earth back across. And we're just going to try to build a little bit of the... we're just going to build a lot of the creases back like this. Doesn't matter if you do it in lines, because then you kind of create your own creases and you create your own little element of character to the way the trousers are flowing as well. So just try to create those nice straight sort of brush strokes along the way that the clothing flows, because if you paint it flowing in the same direction, then it creates more sort of movement and more depth to the way that miniature is supposed to be moving, and more dynamism to the overall pose. So again, I'm going to speed this up a little bit and show you me just building up those layers sort of across the trousers, across the back of the jacket, give you an idea as to how I'm going about it. So when I said earlier that I was going to use a few different things to highlight and lighten, what we're going to do is we're going to use a ink. So I've got a Daler-Rowney ink here. This is a titanium white, so this is like a nice bright white. And you only need a small amount of this because this will highlight and lighten your colour a lot. So in the wet palette here, I've got my my earth. I'm just going to mix that in with the titanium white so that we get a highlight. So as you see, we're just going to mix that until it's nice and smooth. so that there's not a mixture of different tones or colours in there. You want to try and get this nice and smooth, and you can build this up. You could put as much white in as you like, you can put as little white in as you like, but generally the idea is to just try to build that into a highlight of its original colour. So our original colour was the earth, now we have a little bit of a highlight. And the good thing with not shades, the good thing with using ink is nice and thin, but it also creates a real nice vibrance on your miniature. So if you highlight with a white, you're going to get a lot of vibrance onto that colour and that tone that you're putting back in. So now that the colour that we had painted on as the next layer has dried, we're now going to paint on this highlight, but we're only going to highlight, as you see, just like sort of the very edges here. And again, I've watered this down quite a lot so that this then allows me to put multiple layers on to build that highlight up in stages. I'm using a very, very thin brush here. I think I'm using like a number 1 brush. So I'm trying to be as controlled and as careful as possible. Because with this, we're going to want this to be a little bit thinner and only catch mainly the very extreme highlighted areas. So you can see where I'm not quite painting the whole of those trousers, I'm just catching where I think those creases are, and of course where the creases can be seen. So again, we're creating that character, creating that depth. So we've gone normal colour, then shade, then back up to the normal colour. Now we go into the highlight. And again, if you wanted to, you can push that highlight further again. So once you've done this layer, you could add more white to your mixture and then just catch the very, very edges so that you push and boost that highlight further again. But that's entirely up to you. It depends on how much contrast you want out of your character and out of your miniature. So for me, once I had done this layer, that was enough. But once again, I'm going to speed this up and show you me just taking my time of building up this real extreme highlight colour. And again, we're just following the flow of the miniature to create a bit more of that motion and character through. So once you've done with that, and we've got his clothing, so the trousers and jacket are around about the same sort of colour, I'm moving on to a Vallejo sort of red leather. So this is a much brighter colour than I would normally use to do the leather. But it's a new colour, so I thought I'd try it. We'll give it a go and see how it works. So red leather is exactly what it says on the pot. It is sort of a very reddy brown colour. It's really good for highlighting things like your very dark base. And again, when you've got a nice thin coat, it will show through a little bit of that darkness, a little bit of the darker base underneath as well. So that again gives you more tone. Not just are we doing the boots, but we're also going to try and do the belt strap as well, which is particularly difficult on camera, so so bear with me if I make any mistakes or anything like that. But again, take your time, enjoy painting. Doesn't matter with leather if you leave sort of little lines and gaps and things like that, because it kind of adds to the fact that the leather has been a little bit sort of worn and battered and used and things, which is good. That's kind of what you want out of leather. You don't want it to all be one flat colour, because that's not quite in reality how leather works anyway. So we're going to do the same thing as what we did with the clothing on the outside. We're now just going to boost up this shirt. So we're going back to that ghost grey, so that light grey that I was saying we'll be using for the shirt. And again, with a very thin brush, we're now going to just try to pick out the details. And again, you're going to want to take your time and be careful with this stage, because this is quite tricky. This is particularly small on the miniature. This does take a little bit of practice, a little bit of patience, but it is well worth it. It's very rewarding in the end when you look at your miniature at the end, because the shirt and the colour on the sort of lighter tone on that shirt really does pop on the miniature, because he's wearing so much brown. Having sort of a light whitish grey really does stand out on this character. And as you see, I'm doing the same thing as what I did on the trousers and on the jacket, just following the creases, trying to get the brush strokes to follow across the creases as much as possible. Bearing in mind this is quite a fiddly, very small part of the miniature, so like I say, it does take a bit of patience, a little bit of practice. but it's well worth it, because in the end it does really stand out. It does really make your miniature pop from the light to the dark shades then. I mean, it's up to you if you guys wanted to paint your buttons a different colour. I didn't opt to paint the buttons a different colour because painting those buttons, they are very, very, very small. I mean, you can see I'm using a very fine detail brush here, and yet the brush head looks absolutely huge because of how small this part of the miniature actually is. From there then, I'm just putting a highlighted colour across the axe. So just across the axe handle I'm adding a Vallejo flat earth. And again, this one, once it dries down, it will show through a little bit of the base colour, so a little bit of that base brown underneath, to create a nice element of depth and things like that. Don't be shy and don't be too worried if you make a little mistake here or there, because mistakes can be fixed. You know, you can take your time and fix those things up a little bit later. So whereas we use a black or a Vallejo grey on the gun, we're just going to do a very, very, very light dry brush of silver. So I've gone back to that gunmetal that I was using originally, because I'm going to dry brush the axe. I'm also dry brushing a little bit of silver across that gun, because by dry brushing that silver across the gun, you're going to pick up a little bit of the details of the gun, some of the details that you probably wouldn't normally have seen, but without technically having to sit down and really, really paint those layers in, which is a really good, quick and easy little tip in how to paint sort of the guns like that if you've got a particularly small pistol. And we're going to dry brush the bone white across the cream area again as well, because this has got sort of a texture. Like a fluffy texture to the jacket, to the inner part of the coat. It makes it quite difficult to mimic that when you're painting that with a brush. So instead of painting with the tip of our brush, we're just going to drag with a dry brush effect. We're just going to drag the side of the brush across this, so that what happens is that bone white then catches the edges of the furry part of the coat, leaving behind sort of the darker area underneath. Now, dry brushing, you tend not to have as much control, so as I tend to tell people a lot when I'm painting, is if you take your time, use less paint, because you can always layer that paint up as you go, whereas if you put too much on, it is normally quite difficult then to fix afterwards. So as you can see, I'm just trying to be very, very gentle, very, very careful, and just catching some of the edges so that we can highlight that without physically needing to brush those in. So, once we've done all of that, we're just going to look at adding a little bit of blood just to the tip of the axe to show that Rick has been in a fight. He's really been up against it. So for this, we're using the Citadel blood for the Blood God Technical. This is a great paint because obviously it stays looking wet, so it looks like blood even after it's dried onto your axe. And there we go. Rick is painted and he is ready to take on the army of the undead, and there are a few zombies just here for him to take on as well. I hope you guys like this little painting tutorial. It's a very quick and easy painting tutorial with a few little things mixed in, like mixing your paints and building things up. So let me know if you liked it, let me know if any of it helped out, and as always, thank you so much for tuning in and watching.